In May 2024, a company better known for batteries walked onto a stage in Xi'an and said a number out loud. BYD claimed its fifth-generation hybrid engine had reached 46.06% thermal efficiency. To most people, that phrase means nothing. To engineers, it landed like a thunderclap. For over 100 years, gasoline engines had struggled to convert even 40% of their fuel into motion. Now a Chinese automaker was pushing past 46. Then, months later, Geely raised the stakes with an engine rated at 47.26%, inching toward a barrier the industry had long treated as a distant fantasy, 50%. Suddenly, a single percentage point carried enormous weight. Because in engines, efficiency is not a vanity metric. It translates directly into fuel burned, carbon emitted, and kilometers traveled per liter. BYD paired its engine with the 5 German marques hybrid system and advertised fuel consumption as low as 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers, with combined driving ranges above 2,000 kilometers. Those figures would have seemed impossible a decade earlier. What made this a quiet arms race rather than a headline war is that it happened inside cylinders and combustion chambers, hidden from the eyes of drivers who simply noticed their fuel gauge falling more slowly. But the global automotive establishment noticed immediately. Toyota, the company that had defined hybrid efficiency for 25 years, now watched Chinese rivals leapfrog benchmarks it had spent decades approaching. German luxury makers, still selling combustion engines around 40%, faced a competitive gap measured not in styling or software, but in raw thermodynamics. The stakes reach far beyond any single model. If China can mass-produce engines this efficient at low cost, it reshapes the economics of the entire transition away from oil. It changes which cars survive, which markets shift, and how long gasoline stays relevant at all. A percentage point that once lived in academic papers had become a strategic weapon. But to understand why 46 or 47% is astonishing, we first have to understand what that number actually measures, and why, for most engines ever built, the majority of your fuel never moves the car at all. Pour gasoline into a tank, and you are buying stored chemical energy. Thermal efficiency answers one blunt question: how much of that energy actually turns into useful work at the wheels, and how much simply vanishes as heat, noise, and friction? In a conventional gasoline car, the answer is brutal. A typical engine converts only about 25 to 30% of the fuel's energy into motion. The other 70 to 75% is lost. Follow the energy and you can watch it die. Roughly a third disappears straight out the exhaust pipe as hot gas, glowing red at temperatures that can exceed 800 degrees Celsius. Another large slice bleeds into the cooling system, which exists precisely to dump heat overboard through the radiator so the engine doesn't melt itself. More energy is eaten by friction between pistons, rings, and crankshaft bearings, and by pumping losses as the engine sucks air past a nearly closed throttle. Even the water pump, oil pump, and alternator skim their share. By the time energy reaches the tires, most of it is already gone. This is not incompetence, it is thermodynamics. The second law imposes a hard ceiling on how much heat can ever become work, and every real engine falls well below even that theoretical limit. Combustion happens in milliseconds, flames don't burn perfectly, and hot metal radiates energy no matter how cleverly you design it. So when engineers claim 46% efficiency, they are saying something remarkable, that nearly half the fuel's energy survives the gauntlet of exhaust, coolant, and friction to actually do work. That is a machine wasting only slightly more than it uses, rather than wasting 3 times what it uses. Every fraction of a percent gained means recapturing energy that a century of engineers watched slip away as invisible heat. It means less fuel burned for the same journey and less carbon released into the atmosphere. But raising that number is agonizingly hard, because the losses are woven into the physics of combustion itself. To appreciate the breakthrough, we need to see just how stubbornly that ceiling held, across 100 years of relentless engineering effort. The gasoline engine is old. Nicholas Otto built a practical four-stroke engine in 1876, establishing the intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust cycle that still runs beneath nearly every car hood today. Otto's early engines were astonishingly inefficient, converting perhaps 14% of their fuel into work. For the next century, engineers clawed that number upward, one hard-won improvement at a time. They raised compression ratios, squeezing the fuel-air mixture tighter to extract more energy per explosion. They added fuel injection to replace crude carburetors, then turbocharging to force more air into the cylinders. They refined valve timing, sculpted combustion chambers, and coated components to reduce friction. Each advance mattered, yet the gains came slowly, and a stubborn ceiling remained. By the 1990s, the best production gasoline engines hovered around 35% thermal efficiency. Crossing 40% seemed almost mythical for a mass-produced car. The problem was not just physics, but real-world driving. An engine only reaches peak efficiency in a narrow band of speed and load. But cars idle at red lights, crawl in traffic, accelerate hard, then coast. Across that messy reality, engines spend most of their life operating far from their sweet spot, bleeding efficiency at every stoplight. Toyota changed the conversation. With the Prius, launched in Japan in 1997, Toyota deployed the Atkinson cycle, a clever variation that trades peak power for greater efficiency by keeping intake valves open longer during compression. On its own, the Atkinson engine felt sluggish, unacceptable for a normal car, but paired with an electric motor, it worked beautifully. Over successive generations, Toyota pushed its engines past 40%, then to around 41%, setting the global benchmark that stood for years. That 40-plus figure became the mark of engineering excellence, the summit few could reach. It represented decades of accumulated knowledge, billions in research, and the limits of what combustion alone seemed able to deliver. Then Chinese engineers arrived at 46 and 47, blowing past a barrier the industry had treated as nearly fixed. They did it not by inventing new physics, but by changing the engine's fundamental job. And that reinvention began with a single liberating idea about what an engine no longer had to do. For 100 years, a car's engine had one non-negotiable duty: to turn the wheels directly, at every speed, in every condition, whenever the driver pressed the pedal. That single requirement is what capped efficiency for a century. Because the engine had to be everything at once, gentle at idle, fierce during overtaking, it could never stay in its ideal operating zone. It was forced to compromise, constantly, and compromise is where efficiency dies. The breakthrough insight behind these new Chinese engines is deceptively simple. What if the engine stops driving the wheels at all? In a series-style plug-in hybrid, the engine is decoupled from the road. Instead of powering the tires, it mainly spins a generator, producing electricity. That electricity charges the battery, or feeds the electric motors that actually move the car. Suddenly, the engine is freed from every stop-and-go demand. It no longer has to idle in traffic or roar during acceleration. It can run at exactly one thing: its single most efficient point, a precise combination of engine speed and load, where fuel converts to energy most completely. When the car needs more power, the electric motors provide it, drawing on the battery. When the battery runs low, the engine switches on and hums at its optimal rate, charging quietly in the background. This is the trick that shatters the old ceiling. An engine designed to be a dedicated generator can embrace extreme measures that would ruin a normal car. It can use an ultra-high compression ratio and an aggressive Atkinson cycle, accepting weak low-speed performance because the electric motors handle that. It can be tuned so narrowly that it becomes almost useless as a traditional engine, yet supremely efficient as a power plant on wheels. The electric side absorbs all the messiness of real driving, while the engine does the one thing it was optimized to do. This division of labor is why 46 or 47% became possible. The engine and the electric drivetrain each play to their strengths. And it is exactly this philosophy that BYD engineered into its fifth-generation system, a machine built from the ground up around the idea of an engine that rarely touches the road. BYD unveiled its fifth-generation DM technology, known as 5 German marks, in Xi'an in May 2024. At its heart sat a purpose-built 1.5-liter engine, and its headline number was 46.06% thermal efficiency, a figure BYD claimed as the highest for any mass-produced gasoline engine in the world. Nearly every design choice served that single goal. The engine used a deep Atkinson cycle and a remarkably high compression ratio of 15.875 to 1, far beyond what a conventional gasoline engine could tolerate without knocking. It could risk this because it lived inside a hybrid, insulated from the harsh demands of directly driving the wheels. Freed from that burden, the engine could chase efficiency relentlessly. BYD attacked losses on every front. It refined thermal management to control heat precisely, using techniques like exhaust gas recirculation and split cooling to keep the combustion chamber in its ideal temperature window. It reduced friction inside the engine and improved combustion, so more of each fuel droplet burned cleanly. The engine itself produced relatively modest power, but that hardly mattered, because the electric motors delivered the punch drivers actually felt. The results were startling. BYD claimed fuel consumption as low as 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers when the battery was depleted, meaning the engine alone sipped fuel with extraordinary restraint. Combined with a full tank and a charged battery, the system advertised total driving ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers. For context, a conventional gasoline car might travel 700 or 800 kilometers on a tank. BYD was promising nearly 3 times that reach. These figures reshaped expectations across the industry. They suggested that a plug-in hybrid could offer the range confidence of gasoline, with fuel economy approaching that of the most frugal machines ever built. And crucially, BYD could produce these engines at scale and at low cost, embedding them in mainstream models like the Qin and Seal families that ordinary buyers could afford. The 46.06% figure was not a laboratory curiosity destined for a supercar. It was a mass-market weapon. But records exist to be broken, and BYD's rivals were watching closely. Within months, another Chinese giant would answer with a number of its own, pushing the industry one step nearer to the barrier no one had yet crossed. BYD's 46.06% did not stand unanswered for long. In late 2024, Geely stepped forward with a number that pushed the ceiling higher still: 47.26% thermal efficiency, verified and announced through its own next-generation hybrid powertrain program. The gap between the two figures was barely more than a single percentage point, but in an industry that had spent a century clawing toward 40%, that margin represented a fierce, deliberate contest. Geely's engine belonged to its Nord-Thor hybrid platform, a 1.5-liter unit engineered from the ground up as a generator-first machine rather than a traditional road-driving engine. Like BYD, Geely leaned on the Atkinson cycle, high compression ratios approaching 16 to 1, and aggressive exhaust gas recirculation to squeeze more work from every drop of gasoline. Cooled EGR lowered combustion temperatures, reducing the energy bled away as waste heat. Precision thermal management kept coolant and oil at optimal temperatures faster after cold starts. The result was an engine that spent nearly all its time operating inside its most efficient zone, the narrow band where fuel converts to motion with the least loss. What made Geely's announcement sting for competitors was not just the headline number, but the message behind it. China's automakers were now trading world records the way Silicon Valley once traded processor speeds. Each claim was independently framed, each backed by measurable fuel consumption figures, each designed to signal technological leadership to a domestic market of tens of millions of buyers. Within months, the industry stood within striking distance of a barrier that had seemed almost mythological: 50% thermal efficiency. Toyota, Honda, and European manufacturers had chased that figure for decades and quietly conceded it might never arrive in mass production. Yet here were two Chinese firms, less than 3 percentage points away, iterating in cycles measured in months rather than years. This symbolic weight of half was enormous. Half the fuel's energy actually moving the car, half surrendered to heat and friction, and even split after 100 years of overwhelming loss. But every record carries a hidden invoice. Behind each fractional gain lay compromises in power, cost, and complexity that no press release advertised. The real question was what that single percentage point actually cost to buy. Every tenth of a percentage point in thermal efficiency is purchased with engineering sacrifice, and the invoice is written in physics. To reach 46 or 47%, engineers push compression ratios higher, stretch the expansion stroke through the Atkinson cycle, and route large volumes of cooled exhaust gas back into the cylinders. Each of these choices extracts more energy from combustion, and each of them steals power and responsiveness. An Atkinson cycle engine trades peak horsepower for efficiency. The longer the fuel burns and expands, the more work recovered, but the softer the throttle response. High compression demands precise fuel and higher octane tolerance, or careful knock control, adding cost and complexity. Cooled EGR requires additional plumbing, valves, and coolers, raising manufacturing expense and creating new points of potential failure. Thermal management alone, the network of pumps, sensors, and control software keeping the engine in its ideal window, represents a substantial slice of development budget. In a conventional gasoline car, these compromises would be intolerable. A driver merging onto a highway needs immediate torque. An engine tuned obsessively for efficiency and weak in low-end power feels sluggish, even dangerous. This is precisely why near 50% engines cannot simply replace ordinary engines under the hood of a standard vehicle. Their weaknesses would surface the moment a human foot demanded acceleration. The engine was never designed to deliver quickly. The plug-in hybrid architecture dissolves the problem. When an electric motor handles acceleration, launch, and low-speed driving, the gasoline engine no longer needs power on demand. It can be tuned entirely for efficiency, running at its single best operating point as a generator, spinning up smoothly to charge the battery or supply steady cruising energy. The motor absorbs every compromise the engine makes. Softness at low RPM, delayed throttle response, reduced peak output. None of it reaches the driver because electricity fills the gap instantly. In effect, the hybrid system is what makes these extreme engines usable at all. The efficiency record and the hybrid are inseparable. One cannot exist meaningfully without the other, which raises the sharpest question of all. If these engines only make sense inside hybrids, do they threaten the traditional gasoline car or quietly extend its life? The near 50% engine arrives wearing two faces at once. To the traditional gasoline car, it is a quiet threat. A standalone combustion engine, tuned for the full range of driving demands, cannot match these efficiency figures. It must sacrifice economy for responsiveness and rarely operates in its ideal zone. Every time a Chinese automaker announces a new record, the ordinary gasoline vehicle looks more outdated, burning more fuel to do the same work, emitting more carbon per kilometer, and offering fewer reasons to exist in a market tilting toward electrification. In China, where plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles already claim a rising share of new sales, the pure gasoline car is being squeezed from both directions. Yet, to the plug-in hybrid, the same engine is a lifeline. By pairing record efficiency with a battery and electric motor, manufacturers created vehicles that can drive dozens of kilometers on electricity alone for daily commutes, then switch to an ultra-efficient generator for long journeys, eliminating the range anxiety that still deters many electric car buyers. BYD's 5 German Mark system advertised total ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers on a full tank and charge, with fuel consumption figures below 3 liters per 100 kilometers in favorable conditions. Those numbers do not just compete with gasoline cars, they redefine what a combustion engine is for. The engine stops being the primary mover and becomes a backup power plant, deployed only when it can operate at maximum efficiency. This reframes the entire transition to electric vehicles. Rather than forcing buyers to leap directly from gasoline to full battery electric, The plug-in hybrid offers a middle path. Electric for most trips, gasoline for the rest, with efficiency high enough to blunt the environmental and economic penalties of burning fuel at all. The Near-50 engine does not save the traditional car. It accelerates its obsolescence while strengthening the bridge technology meant to carry drivers toward electrification. It is both weapon and scaffold. The question is no longer whether these engines will replace old gasoline cars, but how long the bridge they support will need to stand before batteries and charging networks make even the most efficient combustion engine unnecessary. That answer defines the coming decade. Step back from the individual numbers. 46.06, 47.26, the looming 50, and a larger picture emerges. These engines are not the future of the automobile. They are the most sophisticated version of its past, refined to an extraordinary degree precisely at the moment that past is ending. That paradox defines their role. China's automakers did not build these record-breaking engines to prolong the age of gasoline. They built them to manage its final chapter, to give hundreds of millions of drivers a practical, affordable path away from pure combustion, without demanding they abandon everything familiar at once. Over the coming decade, the significance of these engines will lie in the transition they enable. Battery costs are falling, charging networks are expanding, and energy density is climbing, but not everywhere, and not fast enough for every market or every buyer. In regions with sparse charging infrastructure, in long-distance freight, in price-sensitive segments where a full battery electric car remains out of reach, the ultra-efficient hybrid engine fills the gap. It lowers emissions today while the electric ecosystem matures underneath it. It buys time, and time is the scarcest resource in any technological revolution. There is genuine engineering beauty here. A machine descended from Nicholas Otto's 19th century cycle, once wasting 2/3 of its fuel to heat and friction, now converting nearly half its energy to useful work, but only by surrendering its central role, becoming a servant to the electric motor it once would have rendered unnecessary. The engine achieved its greatest efficiency by accepting its own diminishment. That is the quiet lesson of this arms race. The winners will not be the companies that build the most powerful combustion engine, nor even the most efficient one in isolation, but those who best orchestrate the handoff, engine, battery, and motor working as a single system to carry the industry across a gap no single technology can span alone. These engines were never meant to last forever. They were meant to make their own successors possible, to smooth the passage and then step aside. And that is precisely their genius, their purpose, and their legacy. The engine that builds its own bridge.